Welcome to Burning Bright, a weekly podcast presenting poetry and prose from Passenger. Memorial Day is coming up, the day we Americans honor the memories of those members of the military that lost their lives. It's been around since 1868. On this edition of Burning Bright, three pieces at least tangentially related. First, David Bergman's poem, The Great War Poets. We can be sure that Homer didn't see much action for all his vivid close-ups of the battlefield. Only a blind man could sing hymns to gore. The great war poets always hated war, never sure of coming up with a good rhyme before the mustard gas might blind them. My father, who fought in the 4 invasions, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and D-Day, never talked about his wounds, never told us why he earned a Silver Star, only about his disappointment in Tunis when his first package from home arrived, and he received not the food he'd dreamed of, but a hardbound copy of War and Peace, whose weight he slowly reduced by ripping out each page as he read it, leaving the last in some ditch near Messina. The Great War Poets by David Bergman, from his book Plain Sight. Diane Oatley wrote a piece in Passenger's Trauma issue about how unprocessed ancestral trauma is passed from mother to daughter. Here's an excerpt from her memoir, Bombproof. On one of my visits, my mother tells me a war story. During the German occupation of Norway in the Second World War, women, the elderly, and children were initially ordered to evacuate to Oslo. My mother, who was 12 years old at the time, her brother, and their mother fled to the home of a relative living in the countryside, a few hours north of the city. The train journey was without incident, but no sooner had they arrived and entered the house than the railway tracks were bombed. They dove under the dining room table as all the windows in the house shattered inward, an ice storm of broken glass showering across the floor. When the dust settled, they fled yet again, seeking refuge in a cabin in the mountains. As they were climbing the stony slope, fighter planes dove through the sky, releasing a barrage of gunfire. They cowered behind rocks on the hillside until the fighter planes departed and they could safely continue on their way. An excerpt from Diane Oatley's essay, Bombproof. Gary Stein said, "My maternal grandfather, an Italian immigrant fighting for America, was rescued as described to make my eventual birth possible. To be alive is a matter of chance." Here's Gary's poem, Chance. In 1918, after a German grenade planted my grandfather headfirst in the Argonne like a sapling that might grow forever, a short mustached man in a helmet pulled him feet first from the soft earth, the way a farmer births a breeched calf. The soldier is as dead now as my grandfather, but without that Yank's strong arms, a Southern doctor could not have pulled me from my mother 30 years later, blue and frail in the nick of time. So I enlist in a line of lucky lads who, unlike my miscarried brother, beat the odds, to hear an unknown hero's story and take a chance on all that light and air allows. From Passenger's Issue 76, Chance, by Gary Stein. Our loved ones in the military sometimes die. Their remains are returned to their families to bury or cremate. Here are excerpts from J. Philip Hysell's story about one family's experience, albeit not with a veteran. Ma Bailey's final resting place. When a loved one died back in the city, he was given the proper burial, usually by Rafferty's funeral home, in a nice casket with flowers. However, this was not the Gimlet Hollow method. Most Gimlet Hollow families preferred to bury their own. Dad and Corny walked back to the Jeep to get the picks and shovels, while Fred and I began to pull the weeds and vines from the ground where we were going to dig the grave. Fred and I had gotten the worst of the undergrowth removed when Dad and Corny arrived with the tools. Corny decided it would be best to start with the picks to loosen up the soil first and then apply the shovels, once the first foot or so was broken up. After approximately half an hour of very heavy battering of this hard ground with their picks, Dad and Corny took a breather to take a smoke and let Fred and me try our shovels. It soon became very apparent that going down anywhere near 6 feet at this rate was going to take us well beyond the daylight. Fred, for one, didn't relish the idea of digging in an isolated cemetery after dark. We had not gone down more than the first 2.5 feet when Fred stated the obvious. "Well, boys, I figure we've come to a good place to bring in some of that there dynamite." Excerpts from Ma Bailey's Final Resting Place by J. Philip Hysell, from Passenger, issue 45. To buy David Bergman's book Plain Sight, subscribe to or learn more about Passenger and its commitment to writers over 50, go to PassengerBooks.com. You can download Burning Bright from Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and various other podcast apps. For Kendra, Mary, Christine, Roseanne, and the rest of the Passenger staff, I'm John Shore.